Well, it might surprise you to learn that there are more than 400,000 people on the consolidated terrorist watch list. There are also 6,000 people on the no-fly list. That means forget the government most likely probably watching over you. It means if you're on that list, you're prohibited from traveling. Did you book a flight to a business conference or getting ready for a long overdue vacation? Too bad, because if you're on that list, you are not going anywhere. Now, this, of course, makes sense. But what many people are trying to make sense of is why they're being punished for having the same or similar name as someone deemed unfit to fly. So I want to talk more about this with Jonathan Corbett, president of 410 Technologies. All right, Jonathan, so from what I understand, since 2009, the number of U.S. citizens on the FBI's terror watch list has more than doubled. What is going on here?
I mean, there's been a lot of organizations that have tried to estimate who's on the no-fly list from a lot of different sources, and I've heard the number vary from several thousand to several tens of. One of the problems with the no-fly list is that it's kept very secret. If you suspect that you're on the no-fly list, you can appeal that decision, but they won't actually confirm whether or not you're on the no-fly list. So right now, we don't actually know exactly how many people are on it, but we do know that a lot of people have had the issue where they've gone to an airport and have been told they're on a no-fly list, just despite obviously having no connections to terrorism.
I know that you have been a staunch opponent to the TSA. I know you've even illustrated how people can sneak bad or dangerous items on board. What do you think are some of the most problematic things about what we're seeing now with the TSA?
Well, as far as the no-fly list goes, the most problematic thing is that there's no accountability. So what the government is essentially saying is that these people that are named are so dangerous that they can't be put on an airplane, but not dangerous enough to be arrested on terrorism charges. And it bothers a lot of people that there's essentially no due process, and people are being punished for some kind of suspicion of terrorism without any kind of concrete evidence that would result in their arrest.
And sometimes, as we said, that just simply means, they have a common name, a name of somebody else on that list. What can we do about this, Jonathan, short of, naming our children and or changing our names to something very unique?
Well, I mean, you could probably spell your name slightly differently and get past the little automated systems, but in the end, we need a change from Congress on this one. The idea of again, a list of people that are so dangerous they can't fly on a plane, but not dangerous enough to take into custody is just absolutely absurd. It's an interesting idea to think of, and something that came out after 9/11, but in reality and in practice, it's just something that doesn't work.
It's just so interesting. I mean, as you say, after 9/11, of course everything changed, but this is something that seems was such a major shift and so dramatic, just gathering up all these names, making all these lists, these separate things. To what extent do you think, and perhaps we'll never really know the answer to this, but to what extent do you think this has made us safer?
To no extent at all. Just to say that an organized terrorist group can't create a fake identity or a fake identification document, a fake international passport with a different name and go through with that different name is just absurd. The bottom line is, if we know who the terrorists are, we need to go and get them. We don't need to put them on a no-fly list. We need to actually stop the terrorism from happening. It's just a ridiculous system right now that ends up ensnaring us. Were intentionally named on the list, but really have no terrorism connections, and people that are just incidentally caught up in this net. And the TSA has and really the FBI, who runs the list, have gone through some measures to limit that false matching, which is why we now see our gender and our birth date being collected when we fly on an airplane. That's kind of gets some false positives out on the no-fly list. But even those who are intended to be on the no-fly list still have not been shown to have any terrorist connections through actual evidence that could be used in a court. It's also very difficult to dispute your status on this list. If you dispute it with the TSA and they say, sorry, we can't help, your next step is the courts. But you actually don't have any evidence to bring to the courts. They won't even admit that you're on the no-fly list. So it's a very, very long uphill battle in the circuit courts of appeals, which is very expensive as well.
Jonathan, you used the word ridiculous. I want to play something really quick that a lot of people have found strange, if not ridiculous.
It happened Tuesday night at the airport in Fort Lauderdale. Rihanna and her parents had just boarded a JetBlue flight. They were heading home to New Jersey. They say that's when a JetBlue employee told them they had to get off the plane.
And I said, for what? And he said, well, it's not you or your husband. Your daughter was flagged as no-fly. I said, excuse me?
That is, if you are on the no-fly list because you are known as maybe a possible terrorist, you cannot buy a handgun in America. And I am not one far from liking the mixing of politics and policy, but as my old boss used to say, give me that vote and throw me into that briar patch. I'll make politics out of that every day, because if it's between that terrorist list and the NRA, I know where America is going to be every time, and they're going to make the right choice, and we have got to start building on that. That is the right thing to take into the election, and it's the right policy. If you're on that no-fly list, your access to the right to bear arms is canceled because you're not part of the American family. You don't deserve that right. There is no right for you if you're on that terrorist list. That should be number one in what we do.
Mikey Hicks' family says he's been treated like a terror suspect every time he flies. The airlines say he's on a TSA watch list, even though Mikey is just 8 years old. Mikey and his mom, Najla, are here with us this morning. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Mikey, tell me, what happens when you go to the airport?
When we're at the airport, these guys make me, when we're in security, they make me go over to the side with, like, my dad, because they say, then they have to, like, pat us down.
Because you and your dad have the same name, right?
Yeah, and my mom thinks that, like, some terrorist has the same name as me and my dad.
What do you think of that?
Not good.
Does that make any sense at all to you?
Not really.
Us either. Tell me, Najla, when did this start?
He was a baby. I think he was about 4 or 5 months old when we first flew to Florida for his baptism. And we went to the airport, and you couldn't check in online, you couldn't get a seat, and you couldn't check in at the kiosk, and you had to go to the ticket counter. And then they had to call a supervisor. And that was the first time they asked us for his passport to check and make sure he really was who he was.
Did you think it was a fluke?
Yeah, he didn't really think much about it. I mean, it was right after 9/11, so it was security. You really didn't think much about it. But every time after that, we continued to do it. You know, first it's like a little story you can tell your family. It's kind of funny, and then it's amusing, and then it's a little annoying, and then you get to the point where as he gets older, you get very angry about it.
What do you tell the agents when they do this?
You know, you try and find out why are you doing this? Why can't he check in? Why can't he get on a plane? And some of them say, well, we're not allowed to say, and some of them say, well, you know, he must have the same name as a potential terrorist, and he's on a list. And I'm like, what list? And they're like, you know, some will say, well, we can't say what list, and we get the list from the Homeland Security Department, and some will say he's on the watch list. He's not on the do not fly list, otherwise he couldn't get a ticket. But everyone's told us that he's on the watch list.
So let me get this straight. This would-be bomber on Christmas Day who's on a list is able to get through and get on a plane, but little Mikey isn't without going through all this.
Mike or his dad. Every time we go to the airport, they both have to be cleared now before we... And sometimes they'll randomly... Well, they say it's randomly, but sometimes they'll put these big 4-letter S's on top of his...
red S's.
Red S's, and you know that means, uh-oh, I'm going to get frisked.
That means he's going to get patted down.
So you have tried to contact people, you have sent documentation to the TSA.
We had to bring the TSA there to help us get through.
And not even that?
Security.
Did that even help?
No, my dad doesn't help for anything.
No. When the last trip that we went overseas 2 weeks ago, Congressman Pascal's office was great. He sent a representative from the TSA to meet us in Newark Airport to try and get us through the Continental, which was great. And Michael, the TSA guy, was wonderful and took us through security, but they were still patted down, even with a representative from the TSA there.
Even though you had a TSA right there. Where it appears there might be hope on the horizon. We contacted the TSA, and even though they insist there is no 8-year-old on a watch list, they say that things are changing. They say they're in the process of assuming responsibility from the air carriers for pre-screening passengers against comprehensive terror watch lists, and all you're going to have to do is prove your gender and your date of birth, and you'll be able to get through. Do you think that's a good solution?
Every time we go, we take his passport, they check his gender, they check his date of birth. They see that he's 8 years old, and he still has security problems. So, I mean, if they do it, great. I mean, you know, we totally understand that there needs to be security. We totally understand that this country is under constant threat. You know, we know all about 9/11. I mean, we live 11 miles from the city. But if you would just get all these people off the list that don't belong on the list, then maybe you'd find the right people.
Najla, Mikey, thanks a lot.
Welcome.
Good luck.
Thank you.